Lady Margaret School in southwest London is a highly sought-after secondary school for girls. Normally, the school receives over 600 applications every year for just 90 places. Because it's a voluntary aided school, the governors are responsible for drawing up the admissions policy, which sets out the complex criteria for allocating places. In February 2007, the government introduced a tough new admissions code designed to make school admissions fairer.
There are some really quite heavy prohibitions now on what you can and you can't do as an admission authority.
The governors of Lady Margaret School found they had to radically change their admissions policy.
This may not be, for many people, a popular policy because it is revolutionary.
We've asked Fiona Miller to find out the implications of the new admissions code for governing bodies.
I'm a governor of two schools, one primary and one secondary, and I'm also a journalist who writes about education. I've had a particular interest in the issue of school admissions for some time. I'm going to start by talking to Gillian Windass, who's the policy officer for the National Governors Association, of which I'm also a member.
The new code was basically brought in to make sure that admission arrangements are fair and transparent, and there was a feeling that under the old code that wasn't always the case.
This won't affect all governing bodies, so which governors will it affect?
It will affect governors of voluntary aided and foundation schools, who are their own admission authorities. For community schools and voluntary controlled school, it is the local authority who is the admissions authority, and they will make sure that the admission arrangements of those schools meet the code of practice.
But governors of community and voluntary controlled schools will have to ensure that their school policies don't discourage parents from applying.
So such things as uniform policy and school trips. If you have a very expensive school uniform, for example, even though the admission arrangements don't refer to that school uniform, parents might think, well, I can't afford to send my child to that school, and that would disadvantage them.
In its drive to give disadvantaged children a fair deal, the new code sets out very clearly in red the musts and must-nots of the admissions system. So Fiona goes to discover what the impact of the new code has been on the admissions policy at Lady Margaret School.
Hello Richard, nice to meet you.
Good morning, Fiona. Welcome to Lady Margaret.
Richard Waterhouse has been Chair of Governors for 7 years.
So Richard, can you tell me what the old admissions criteria were?
The school has faith places, which are for Church of England applicants, and open places. We had a system of points based on journey time, and then a system of references and reports from primary school head teachers, and in the case of church applicants, a report from a reference from their local incumbent. And these applicants were then tested, and as a result of that test, the applicants were banded.
What were you trying to achieve?
We were aiming to admit those children who would benefit from the particular education that this school provides. And this school, of course, is well known for having a high academic record.
But I mean, they could be interpreted as both subjective and slightly selective.
Once you go into the word subjectivity, it inevitably has shadows of a selection, I would agree. Inevitably, when people do make reports, they are subjective judgments.
So how did the governors react when the new code arrived on the scene, spelling the end of selectivity?
I think the initial reaction was one of some disbelief, and I think that's no more than a natural reaction for governing bodies that have done things a certain way and suddenly find themselves having to change. It meant that the old criteria of things like reports and references from primary schools and estimations of parental support and so on were no longer allowed to be used. And this left us with really relying on journey time to the school, and in the case of faith applicants, the reference from the local church.
The governors set up an admissions working party which met 2 or 3 times in autumn 2006 to discuss the options left open to them. They decided to dismiss journey time as a criterion because it would be too open to appeal.
From there, we gradually came to be attracted to that which the new admissions code allows us to do, which is to go for random selection.
And what will that mean in practice then? You won't be just taking random selection from all over the southeast of England. You've narrowed it down in some ways, haven't you?
In practice, random selection gave us a lot of difficulty to determine, because at first we planned to apply it basically to areas where children had come from in the past. It then occurred to us that if we did that, we would have an impossible number of applications.
So the governors decided that 60% of places would go to the borough, Hammersmith and Fulham. A wider area, including postcodes in adjoining boroughs, was allocated 40% of places.
But even somebody who lives in Hammersmith and Fulham now, close to the school, wouldn't be guaranteed a place?
No.
Because they'd be drawn out of a hat?
They would be, yes, we call it random allocation. We're very careful not to call it a lottery.
Okay. And who's going to administer it?
I think it's laid down in the code. It has to be done externally from the school.
Did you take outside advice to help you come to your decision?
There has been informal advice the whole way along, but I would stress that because it is a revolution, there is no past practice to turn to.
The governors did at this stage consult with the local authority.
The role of the LEA we see very much is ensuring that schools are as compliant as we can make them become. Now, with regard to Lady Margaret, for example, who invited us quite early to meet with their admissions working party, and we became aware that they wanted to go down the random allocation route. We thought that that was particularly exciting because it was quite clear from the code that random allocation was something that the government was promoting.
Did you offer them any particular advice?
Our discussions with Lady Margaret was particularly around how we could ensure that Hammersmith and Fulham girls would not be disadvantaged by the new proposals. And therefore, within the random allocation, they have agreed that 60% of places will be allocated to those postcodes within the Hammersmith and Fulham deanery.
The idea of random allocation was put to the full governing body.
And did you find it easy to persuade everybody that you needed to make these quite momentous changes in a way?
It is something of a revolution, which is why it took a certain amount of time for people to get their mind around it. There is inevitably the odd abstention and the odd objection, but by and large, that was the will. It was the clear majority of the governing body at the end to go for random allocation.
Then came the formal consultation stage.
It goes out to a prescribed list of people, which is really the local authority, I think the neighbouring local authorities, and to the primary schools, who then have a certain number of weeks to come back and raise issues, comments and so on.
And was it fairly painless, or were there objections?
No, there were a very considerable number of objections, based, I think, largely on the area we had set.
Churches and local authorities now excluded from the new admissions zone were very upset.
Some people have lost out on this, inevitably. Not only people who live close, but people who live in areas traditionally covered.
The governors also had to contend with problems arising from their decision not to give priority to siblings.
The Admissions Code allows a sibling policy. At secondary level, in a city where there is public transport and underground trains and things, we don't believe it's appropriate.
As a result of the consultation process, the governors agreed to include a further 2 postcodes from the outer area, but decided not to change the sibling policy. But that's not the end of the process. Under the new code, the local authority must now publish a notice about its school admissions policies in the local press.
There then follows a period of 6 weeks during which certain prescribed groups, including parents, can make objections.
Any objections are dealt with by the school's adjudicators. Alan Parker is one of 10 schools adjudicators for England.
The Office of the Schools Adjudicator's responsibility is to enforce the Code of Practice on admissions. And essentially we do that when somebody who has got a right to object complains about what an admissions authority is doing.
Does the objection come directly to you, or does it go to the Chief Adjudicator's office?
It goes to the office, which is based in Darlington. All of the individual adjudicators work from home. And so what will happen is the office will ring up and ask if we're able to take a new case. And the first thing we do is to make sure that we're able to take it, because we have rules of impartiality. The office will then send us the papers, which will be the objection form that's been filled in.
Another provision of the code is that parents can now object using an online form on the school's adjudicator's website. What happens then?
Automatically, the local authority and the school that is being objected to, and if it's a church school, the local diocese, will be invited to comment on the objection. We gather together all of those papers and then work out what the answer is. We do sometimes hold a meeting with the people who are involved, but quite often it can be done on the papers because obviously this is a decision about a written policy. Decisions are final in the sense that there is no formal right of appeal because obviously we are an appeal body to begin with. However, if somebody very strongly believes that we've got it wrong from a procedural point of view or legally, then they can seek a judicial review.
What are the sorts of things people object over?
Particularly the things that are now changed in the Code of Practice are likely to come up. For example, giving priority to the children of staff at the school. Things to do with looked after children, of course, because there's very tight regulation on that. The sibling criteria are sometimes a matter of dispute. Catchment areas can be challenged.
Do you think the underlying spirit of this new code is different to the one that went before?
I think it is. There's much more emphasis on equity, and I think in particular there is much greater emphasis on trying to level the playing field for disadvantaged groups in society.
The school's adjudicator has received several objections to the new admissions policy for Lady Margaret School.
We are now answering questions to the adjudicator, and we hope obviously the adjudicator will support our judgments, and that is what they are judgments. And that will take us through to seeing, as it were, the published document hopefully confirmed, and then it can be go out to the various schools, prospectuses and so on.
What impact does Richard think the new policy will have on applications?
We simply have no idea what the effect will be in this its first year. What we don't want is 10,000 applicants to process.
Do you have any idea whether it will be better or worse in terms of appeals?
Again, I'm into the unknown. I think the grounds for appeals will reduce.
So your ultimate next step might be to review the whole thing?
We will have to look at the results of the applications at the end of the year and review our policy accordingly for 2009. We would like to have a good number of applicants without being swamped, and then to be operating a system which is seen to be fair and which is generally acceptable to everybody, whether they are successful or not.
We think it's been a very bold decision and that they have taken their responsibilities as an admission authority very, very seriously.
It's very early days to say how the code will run in practice. Clearly this could involve an awful lot of work for governors, but actually what we heard at Lady Margaret School is that the governors really want to get their code in shape so that in future they can focus on other things, school improvement and their long-term strategy for teaching and learning, rather than having to focus on dealing with complaints from parents and the local community about the way they manage their admissions.